I'm absolutely delighted to be able to welcome our special guests today because there's nobody better to talk about this than Hedley Rees. And many of our audience may know Hedley from our Man to Molecule interview, and we have recently done another interview with Hedley. Hedley's a world expert in pharmaceutical manufacturing and distribution, and he's got 12 years of evidence on his Substack, Inside Pharma. But you just mentioned, Mike, there, Ian Rees and the MHRA press release, and it just so happens that Hedley has had an interview with the MHRA, with Ian Rees, in the last few hours, last few days. So I'm delighted to be able to welcome Hedley to UK Column News to tell us all about his meeting with Ian and what you make of this recent news, Hedley, from your perspective. Hedley, welcome.
Hi, Debbie. Nice to speak to you again. Yes, I had a call with Ian Rees and David, I can't remember his second name, yesterday on a Freedom of Information request that I sent in on the 14th of November, where I noticed that MHRA had changed their regulations for manufacture and distribution of medicinal products just for advanced therapies, what they call advanced therapy medicinal products. So I thought, well, that can't be right, because it was allowing hospital pharmacies and other similar facilities to finish off the manufacture of these therapies. Now, any medicinal product goes into the human body next once it's manufactured. And there are strict regulations, good manufacturing practice and good distribution practice that ensures that when the patient gets the product, it's safe. And when the company gets a license to market a product, a marketing authorization, they have to submit all the details of the supply chain from the raw materials right the way through to finished product going into the patient. And that has to be approved by the regulator, which in this case would be MHRA, before they get a license. So I asked Ian Rees, how is he going to be able to assess the supply chain that goes into the hospital, what they call the distribution supply chain from the finished product manufacturer, who's made, similar to the COVID vaccines, made these vials at minus 70 degrees C, packed up in 195 vials, 5 doses to a vial. How is a hospital pharmacy going to accept a gene therapy like that? They have to carry out what they call bona fides on the supplier to make sure the whole supply chain is bona fides. They have to have a license to be able to import the products or bring the products in. They have to have experience in inventory control. You know, all the things you'd expect to have in manufacture. And I was told this is all going to be the responsibility of the Care Quality Commission. So at the end of the call, we agreed 2 points. One, Ian Rees sent me the link that took these advanced therapies out of the safety net of the Falsified Medicines Directive of 2011, which is absolutely there because people have died in the supply chain because falsified and adulterated medicines have actually got into patients. Heparin is a good example in 2007, 2008, where patients died and had serious adverse events. They decided that it wouldn't apply to these advanced therapies. I don't know, how can you do that? How can you have, it's an EU directive, and there's a committee for advanced therapies, which to me appears to be self-elected, which seem to be deciding all these things. And they're not a regulator as such. So I left that completely baffled. The other thing Ian Rees is going to do is going to tell me, because he said the responsibility for the hospital would be on the company that manufactures the products. So they will have to ensure that they put in place all the facilities and the procedures in the hospital pharmacy, and they will have to include that in the license application when they apply to market the drug. And I don't think they'll be able to do that. I don't think they will, because this is a harmonized global procedure. It's been harmonized through the International Conference of Harmonization of Technical Requirements for Pharmaceutical Products. an organization in Spain which has worked very hard over the last 10, 15 years to do this harmonization. So how can the UK suddenly do this on its own? I just, it's left me puzzled. So that's where we are with that.
Hedley,
Yeah.
thank you. I don't know, gentlemen, if you've got any comments that you want to ask Hedley. Otherwise, I've only just got one quick question.
Just one, if I may. Hedley, I've been away in Scotland for a few days, so some areas of the news I'm a little bit behind the curve at the moment. But I was hearing rumours that the MHRA was sort of starting to backpedal and say, well, no, we don't have ultimate responsibility for safety, somebody else does. Have you heard anything along those lines? It's almost as if now the spotlight has really come on the MHRA. People are asking them the right questions about what they are actually doing to protect patients from dangers of particularly trial pharmaceutical products. The MHRA is trying to step back, push the blame onto others. Have you heard anything about this at all?
I mean, anecdotally, and just looking at it, they do appear to be. The thing is, it's become very hazy of what a competent authority is for the licensing, approval, and inspection of drugs. But clearly, the UK competent authority is the MHRA. So when they license a drug, they have to make sure the clinical, the safety, the non-clinical data, and all what they call the chemistry, manufacturing, and controls data, which is the end-to-end supply chain, they have to evaluate that and ensure it's safe. And no one else can have that responsibility because they have the inspectors to do it. So this comment about the Care Quality Commission, that's why I asked the question about the licensing, because they won't have the skills and experience to inspect hospital pharmacies working on advanced therapies. But aside from that, I just don't know why they are involved. But I would also say that this point of care manufacturing appears to be part of the whole plan of going wall to wall mRNA injections. It seems very much to me because this point of care applies to cell and gene therapies. We've got a cell and gene therapy catapult in the UK, which with a role to the part of Innovate UK. Their role is to really push gene therapies and cell therapies as far in the UK as they can, so that UK becomes number one in the world. And I note that I was asked by the Office for Life Sciences to help on a government advanced manufacturing supply chain initiative grant with a company called Oxford Biomedica, and they actually supply now. When I worked with them, they were developing the viral vector for Kymriah, which is a Novartis gene therapy for blood cancers, CAR T therapy, and it's about $470,000 a treatment, so it's not cheap. But subsequently, Oxford Biomedica have made the AstraZeneca stroke Oxford University. They developed and manufactured the adenovirus vector. Not many people. Well, it's quite. I mean, Boris Johnson has visited the plant. Danny Alexander visited there when he was in the coalition government. But people don't seem to realise that neither AstraZeneca nor Oxford University did a jot in developing these vaccines, or I should call them injections. It was Oxford Biomedica. With Moderna, it's a company called Lonza, which is, again, the biggest contract manufacturer in the world. And they are part of this. And there are press releases by Lonza that confirm that. So all these injections have not been manufactured or developed by the companies selling them. They've been manufactured under contract, and the companies selling them have full responsibility for that whole supply chain, the entire supply chain. So it's really hard to, I just can't believe what's happening. I joined the industry in 1980, and in those days, everything was joined up. The big pharma companies owned all the facilities, they employed the people. nowadays Big Pharma have just outsourced all the physical activities of drug development, of manufacture, and they just aren't in a position to develop drugs. And that's why I think that's why this has happened, because they just aren't bringing new products to market. And gene therapies is the last great white hope for Big Pharma. Even if they actually have to contravene all the regulations and collaborate with fraud and that whole thing, better that than dissatisfy investors because they're not bringing new products to market.
Yeah.
And, I can say that.
Hedley, thank you so much. I've got more questions for you, but we'll address those in extra, but I'll throw back to the studio. But thank you, Hedley, so much for that information. Super, thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks,
excellent.
Debbie. Alex, over to you then. We can't hear you. You're muted. Hold on. There you go.
Shall we try now? Yes, this is a very good sequela to what we've just heard from Hedley Rees, because somebody who at least publishes as Nick Denham, a retired senior civil servant from a Whitehall government department, has had this Freedom of Information request back from the MHRA on the 11th of this month. And I don't know whether Nick Denham is a publishing pseudonym, because in the actual reply he supplied, the name is blanked out. But here they're replying to questions which they place in blue italic text. And it's particularly about this question of what a licensing authority has to do, which Nick Denham, among other informed people, has been asking about. So this is a multi-pronged FOI. Nobody can say that it's coming just from Hedley Rees or just from the UK column. So the question was, the human medicines regulations, this of course is secondary legislation, define the licensing authority as, and this is quite common in my experience, speaking as Alex, the Secretary of State, this case, the Health Secretary. And that everyone who's a civil servant acts under that authority, under that tree, as it were. So the buck stops with the Secretary of State. Please, can you send me the MHRA document? Because, of course, the MHRA is a spin-off agency, arm's length agency, too removed from the Secretary of State. Can you send me your document describing the flow of delegation from the Secretary of State to postal people in the MHRA who can authorize medicines for public use? The MHRA response is all the COVID vaccines and therapeutics authorization decisions were taken by the licensing minister, that's the Secretary of State, and were not delegated. The MHRA does not hold a document describing the flow of delegation from the Secretary of State to anyone in the MHRA who can authorize medicines for public use. The next question was, you're allowed to make temporary authorizations for medicines. We heard about this from Hedley just a moment ago. What's your instruction on that regard? They did attach copies of letters that the Department for Health and Social Care sent to the agency regarding that Regulation 174 authorization to give temporary authorization. Please note that these do not denote instructions to authorize, but it's a case-by-case basis. Next question, who at your agency, the MHRA, signed the temporary authorizations for public use of the COVID vaccines? Reply, the Minister, the Secretary of State again. Next question, send me copies of your 1-year reviews of the temporary authorization. So that would be around, I don't know whether we're counting from the rollout at New Year 2021, just about, or from the time of authorization during 2020. But after a year, MHRA was supposed to have said, well, how is this performing? They reply at the MHRA, we understand that you're referring to the following. And here's the new regulation, which I won't read all the text of, but it's that they are to do a review as soon as is reasonably practical after the end of 1 year of temporary authorization. They have to evaluate whether there have been adverse consequences for the market in medicines named first, or for patient safety named second. So here, even you see that the MHRA is there first and foremost for the pharmaceutical industry, as they often say themselves these days. And they are to conclude, make conclusions, review them, and publish in the report. And they reply, well, here's the report, here's a link to it, and the rest is standard blurb, although I note in passing that the Information Commissioner's Office, as to whom they refer, is rather ironically lodged in a building in Cheshire called Wycliffe House. David Scott has in a speech which we transcribed on ukcolumn.org, noted that Wycliffe is famous not least for his saying, picked up later by Abraham Lincoln, that government should be of the people, for the people, and by the people. So if you want to see this written up, then here it is at the Daily Sceptic. And in a moment, I know we're short for time, so I'm sure Hedley will be brief, but in a moment, I'm very keen to hear what Hedley has to say in response to this. So the write-up of this by Nick Denham, and I will not read all this text, but I recommend people read this in full, says that having received this, I'm sure that the blame game has started. Why? Well, to summarize what's on screen here, they would have known all about scaling up production problems. This is the core of Hedley's expertise, as I understand it. He's been sounding the alarm on this for years. For example, mixing larger quantities and evening them out from batch to batch. People know about this. We have a 5-part Mike Yeadon transcript up on the website as well. Search for Yeadon and you'll find it very easily. Adverse, or the hot lots, I think we call the key part of it. Nick Denham goes on to say, why are they passing the buck now? Well, they knew about the risk being very low in younger age groups, that you would have serious adverse, serious consequences of COVID, i.e. hospitalization or death. We have something else forthcoming in UK column about this from another writer. They would have known all this, and they have been criticised by Baroness Cumberledge for being unresponsive and defensive, but they are not deaf, blind or stupid. They knew. And at the end of this report, Nick Denham, and I won't read this all in full, but he summarises 8 detailed reasons based on freedom of information inquiries results, just demonstrating the gold value of keeping track of these and keep staying on the agency's tail, as in any other area that you're campaigning on. They didn't have safety audits. They didn't have processes for investigating individual yellow card reports to investigate adverse reaction reports. They can't define what a quantitative risk is. They didn't hold data from the real world. They lost 20% of their posts during the first year of the COVID jab rollout due to funding cuts. They don't have processes for delegating authorities to approve medicines for public use. They have hidden safety data by redacting numbers in tables on the spurious pretext of patient confidentiality. And they appear quietly to have dropped targeted active monitoring, which was supposedly the crown jewels of their COVID vaccine surveillance. So in very brief terms, Hedley, is any of this new to you? And where does it take us, really? What's the next push in freedom of information requests?
No, none of this is new. You'd expect it. If this was the aviation industry and, they had just ignored all the Civil Aviation Authority regulations and, and just done their own thing, then, all these similar questions would have arisen. I keep saying, medicines are manufactured, medicinal products are manufactured like any other product. We know it takes 10 years to bring a drug to market. And what we're seeing now is more and more people are waking up to the fact that, well, how did you develop this in 9 months and get at the full scale to all the safety testing in the supply chain? Every time you scale up, you have to redo the animal testing to make sure the molecule that's being produced is still safe. None of that could have gone on because they did what they call the rolling review, which they did phase 1, 2, and 3 all together. So there would have been scale-ups going from 1, 2, and 3, and then from the full launch quantities, and there will have been no testing carried out. So I'm aware of Nick's work, and he's done some really good work there. And he comes from an industry. If someone in nuclear or, as I say, aviation, aerospace, they'd all understand the importance of quality management systems, everyone knowing who's doing what, who reports to whom, what they do when they find a fault or an error, and the 1,001 things that anyone working in industry, in those, at least in those industries, would know. You can't deal with this on the back of a fag packet, to use a colloquialism.
And for the sake of our American viewers, fag packet here means cigarette packet, just in case we get any write-ins on that. But it's a very well-known British idiom. In closing his piece, Nick Denham, so it's interesting to hear that he's well-known, or his writing is well-known to Hedley Rees, says this is something for members of Parliament and the COVID inquiry to ask. Incidentally, the penultimate session of the European Parliament's COVID inquiry special committee has just been held, or is about to be held next week, is going to be held And meanwhile, the European Court of Accounts, I'll put the link in the show notes courtesy of Kenny, has concluded that in EU level, the COVID certificate was effective, but the track and trace app, absolutely not, because it was poorly implemented by national authorities. So that's one to keep an eye on. We go on to other health matters, which of course is Debbie's purview, but she's with us today. So I will bring on screen this report from an email that has reached us from beg your pardon. This is first of all this, which is Debbie would be very keen for people to fill this in the final week of its operation. It's an MHRA survey. It's a complicated URL, and you have to put HTTPS on it. So wait a few hours and follow it from the show notes. Just a few days left for the MHRA to receive your reply on how well you think they communicate with healthcare professionals to improve medicines and medical devices safety. I'm sure you'll have plenty to say about that. Now, an email from a viewer, sorry for the mistake in the sequence here, and I haven't corrected the typos in there, but it's a heartfelt email from a UK column source who has been very informative to us in the past from the northeast of Scotland. The first paragraph is about another friend, peripheral to the main story, dying in sheltered housing. It believes it's from neglect, and I'm sorry to say that this is something we hear in the thousands now. But the main concern from this viewer this time is that the friend of this UK column viewer started going blind in her right eye and went to Aberdeen Hospital. She informed me, I am vaccinated. They put her on an oxygen machine for what I believe to be the period of 1 week. She got sick in the week before Christmas and just came back to work yesterday in January, stating her legs were like jelly. She can no longer watch television because of her eye problems, and I think with the hospital putting her on oxygen that they did in fact try to kill her, similar to the ventilator scandal in America. Here it gets worse. One employee told her during her hospitalization, if you hadn't got the vaccine, it would have been much worse. The viewer says, my jaw hit the ground. These people are either suffering from psychosis or are genuinely insane. I now feel that these hospitals are death centers. These are opinions, we broadcast them as such. Interesting nugget at the end here. After seeing Debbie's piece regarding hospital euthanasia, I feel there is something you missed out. I believe there is a remedy to this because of UK trade union law and the coercion of the public. Gareth Icke, that's David Icke's son, of course, interviewed a woman who was well versed in this law. One of her clients was ordered to take a PCR test. She refused and then presented this hospital with a legal letter stating in writing that coercion by medical staff carries a prison sentence of 6 months. The staff in this hospital never bothered the person again. Final piece from me in this segment before we go on to Debbie for the real core of health presentation. But this is European, so it's really within my purview. I've been saying for some while that Portugal is a particularly hopeful and constitution-respecting country in EU terms. We see yet more evidence of it. So a viewer who is a dentist and a signatory, or in fact a starter of the petition in question, please don't be cynical about petition. I know some of our audience are, but we show this in order to disabuse you of that notion. Petitions can be very important. Is this. In July 2021, a Portuguese petition was created against the COVID vaccination of children and young people. It gathered more than 9,000 signatures. Of course, in the UK, you need 100,000 to get a parliamentary debate. But Portugal's rather more democratic. I know it has a much smaller population. But with 9,000 signatures, that was enough in August last year to have it submitted to Parliament. On the 15th of June 2022, the petition author, a cardiologist, and I, a dentist, were heard by the Health Commission. I don't think you'll get this kind of promptness in Britain. After almost a year and a half, says the writer, the petition will finally be discussed in Parliament by the political parties and voted on the 3rd of February. A lot's happened in the meantime, and we have a lot more information now. I write, I hope that viewers take note from other countries about this, I write because I want to make some noise with this vote in Parliament in Lisbon so that it does not pass unnoticed. Sometimes, he writes, just by making noise abroad, we can achieve something domestically. And who knows, if the petition is approved in Portugal, and my assessment, Alex speaking, is that Portugal is probably the best hope in the EU, then it could be an example for other countries. EU countries tend to notice only what other EU countries do. So I'll just show on screen very briefly for those who speak Portuguese or live in Portugal, in the Participação or Have Your Say part of the parliamentary website in Portugal. This is the site to go to. It will be in the show notes again. It's Initiative 2232. It has already reached the stage of debate and vote.
Okay, very good. Alex, thank you very much for that.